When a little girl begged her school's janitor to let her stay at the school overnight, the janitor initially thought that the girl was just a young child looking for an adventure. However, after he noticed the girl's jumpy and scared demeanor, and saw a bruise peeking out from under her sleeve, he realized that something sinister and evil was going on in the little girl's home. With the girl's safety hanging in the balance, a race against time began as the girl's teacher, the janitor, and a determined social worker rushed to save her before it was too late. This is a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Willow Ridge Academy, illuminating the long corridors with a warm glow. A faint echo of distant footsteps occasionally broke the hush that fell once the students had left for the day. However, on this particular afternoon, Mr. Morton, known to everyone at the school simply as Morton, was not surprised to find a single student lingering. He had, after all, spotted Lila before, a quiet girl with gentle eyes, who always seemed to hover at the edge of everyone else's chatter and laughter. The warmth of the day had done little to soothe the tension in Lila's fragile frame, and when she approached Morton in the hallway, her eyes betrayed a pleading desperation. I need to stay here tonight," she whispered. Even though her voice was nearly inaudible, Morton could detect the tremor of urgency. He gave her a kind look, momentarily confused, and asked her why. Lila only bowed her head in silence, unable to muster any coherent explanation. That was when Morton noticed her right hand trembling and spotted, just below her sleeve, a discolored bruise marring her delicate arm. Morton felt his heart clench. He had looked after this school for decades, fixing broken locks, cleaning graffiti, ensuring the floors gleamed underfoot. But never in his many years had he been asked by a student to spend the night on school grounds. At first, he wondered if it might be a playful notion, a child seeking an adventure. Yet there was no mistaking the fear in her wide eyes, nor the bruise she tried to hide. The bruise looked fresh, its edges dark with the unmistakable hue of recent injury. He knelt to her level, voice gentle but firm. "You can't stay overnight," Morton said, remembering, as he did, the security protocols that required the building to be locked. "Tell me what's wrong. I'll help you." He reached out, taking care not to touch her bruised arm. Lila flinched anyway, as if bracing herself for another blow. Morton froze, horror creeping through him. Something was terribly amiss. In that moment, as a hush settled in the corridor, Morton realized that everything was about to change. If Lila was truly in danger, then letting her walk out of those doors without help was unthinkable. Tension coiled in the pit of Morton's stomach. He glanced around, as though expecting someone to appear. But the hallway was empty and silent aside from the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Despite the mounting apprehension, Morton kept his voice calm, measured. "Lila," he asked gently, "does someone hurt you at home?" There was no immediate response. She lowered her head, tears threatening to spill. He saw the flicker of shame and fear cross her features. Morton recalled how often children in distress tried to hide evidence of abuse, fearful that speaking up would only make things worse. Still kneeling, Morton asked, "Can you tell me who's doing this to you?" Another pause. Lila swallowed, her eyes welling with tears. But she didn't speak. She merely nodded in the faintest possible way, as if acknowledging that yes, something bad was happening in that place she called home. Morton felt no need to push her for the specifics. His priority was to protect her, to figure out how to keep her safe. He rose slowly, careful not to startle her, and motioned down the hall. "Come on," he said gently, "we'll figure this out together." Lila followed him, her small footsteps echoing in the corridor. They made their way to Mr. Clark's classroom, which was nearly empty except for a stray stack of books on a side table and a few leftover art projects pinned to the walls. Mr. Clark, a compassionate teacher who had once spoken warmly about Lila's timid nature, was sitting at his desk, scribbling some notes and reading over tomorrow's lesson plan. The moment Mr. Clark saw Lila's tear-streaked face and the anguished expression on Morton's, his own features grew immediately concerned. "What's going on?" Mr. Clark asked, standing up to greet them. He gently rested a hand on Lila's shoulder, but her trembling only grew. She stepped back, inadvertently revealing the bruise under her sleeve. Mr. Clark's eyes flickered from Lila's arm to Morton's worried face. "I see," he murmured, tamping down a rush of outrage that threatened to bubble up. "We should get Ms. Daniels involved. Right now." Ms. Daniels was the social worker assigned to Willow Ridge Academy. Everyone in the district spoke highly of her intuition and her unwavering dedication to children's welfare. She was known for somehow always sensing which families needed help, even before the children themselves spoke up. And in dire circumstances, she never hesitated to act. At this moment, Ms. Daniels was in the teacher's lounge, her laptop open, finishing reports from earlier in the day. When she heard the shuffle of feet at the door, she glanced up and saw Mr. Clark leading Lila inside, with Morton trailing behind. The expression on their faces alone told her something was wrong. She greeted them with a subdued, "What happened?" Mr. Clark exchanged a look with Morton before replying, "We're worried about Lila. She asked Morton if she could stay here overnight. And there's," he motioned to the bruise. Ms. Daniels rose from her seat. "Lila," she said softly, ushering her to a chair. "Sit here for a moment." Lila complied, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself invisible. "Is it true you don't want to go back home?" Lila fidgeted with the end of her sleeve, eyes darting around. She nodded, though her response lacked conviction, as if fear kept her from fully admitting the truth. Ms. Daniels quietly knelt in front of Lila, her voice hushed. "It's okay," she said. "We're here to help you. Can you tell me why you're so scared? Is it your foster parents that did it?" Mention of her foster parents, Julian and Miranda Carson, seemed to make Lila's breath hitch. She forced her eyes shut, as if trying to hide. Ms. Daniels exchanged a grim look with Mr. Clark. They knew the Carsons maintained a polished reputation in the community, but reputations could be deceiving. Ms. Daniels glanced at the bruise, then met Lila's gaze. "We're going to figure this out," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're not alone anymore." At that, Lila opened her mouth as though she were about to speak, but no words came. Instead, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Ms. Daniels gently laid a hand on Lila's own. "I'll take you somewhere safe tonight," she promised. "Mr. Clark and Mr. Morton will help. You don't have to worry." The world felt suspended in that moment. Morton, who was unaccustomed to meddling in anyone's personal life beyond the friendly greetings he offered students each day, realized how complicated this was about to become. Yet, he found himself ready, if not anxious, to stand on the front lines. He had spent enough years ignoring the shadows in certain children's eyes. This time, he vowed, would be different. Night was falling outside, and the corridors of Willow Ridge Academy were growing dimmer. Normally, Ms. Daniels would have left by now, but there was no question she would stay until Lila was settled in a safe place. After a quick phone call to Child Protective Services, Ms. Daniels also contacted a local emergency shelter, wanting to ensure there would be room for Lila if things at home were as bad as she feared. All the while, Mr. Clark tried his best to console the trembling girl. He offered her water, asked if she wanted anything to eat. Lila only shook her head. She sat quietly, her eyes red but unwavering. Her fragile form looked even smaller under the fluorescent glow of the lounge. As Ms. Daniels finished speaking on the phone, she returned to Lila's side with a somber expression. "We'll do a home visit with your foster parents," she said. "We need to see what's going on there. I'll bring a colleague for a second opinion. But until that happens, you don't need to go back tonight. I've arranged something else for you." A flicker of relief passed across Lila's eyes. At least, for a moment, she seemed less tense. She didn't protest when Ms. Daniels guided her out of the lounge, with Mr. Clark and Morton following. The building was emptied of all other staff. The only sounds were the click of Miss Daniels's heels and the echo of footsteps. They exited through the front entrance and descended the worn step. The evening air was cool, carrying a gentle breeze that ruffled Lila's hair. A subdued sense of urgency emanated from Miss Daniels as she opened the passenger door of her car for Lila. She offered the girl a small, encouraging smile. "I'll drive you," she said softly. "We'll check your home tomorrow. For now, we just want you to be safe." Lila slid into the seat. Mr. Morton, standing near the car, gazed at her with a mixture of concern and warmth. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "I'm always here, okay?" Lila nodded, her expression solemn. Mr. Clark leaned down, placing a comforting hand on the edge of the car door. "It's going to be all right," he said gently. "We believe you. No one should hurt you like that." They closed the door. Miss Daniels started the engine. Together, they drove off into the approaching night, leaving Morton and Mr. Clark standing on the curb. Neither of them spoke at first, but they shared a mutual understanding. This was only the beginning of something far larger and darker than they might have guessed. The next day arrived with a swirl of tension. Ms. Daniels, accompanied by a colleague from Child Protective Services named Christine, visited the Carson household. On the surface, Julian and Miranda Carson presented the ideal image of caring guardians. Their home was pristine, the garden well tended, the interior tastefully furnished. Miranda welcomed them with a polite smile, though Ms. Daniels detected a certain stiffness in her posture. Julian, dressed in casual but neat attire, exuded a quiet confidence as he led the visitors to the living room. A faint trace of cologne lingered in the air. He gestured for them to sit on a plush sofa. "We're always ready to cooperate," Julian said, his voice so smooth it could have been practiced. Ms. Daniels kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for your time. We'd just like to speak with you about Lila's well-being and make sure everything is all right at home." Miranda folded her hands on her lap and smiled serenely. "Of course. Lila is a very sensitive child, but we try our best to provide her with everything she needs. We want her to feel safe." Christine, the CPS colleague, took notes while Ms. Daniels spoke. She asked about Lila's routines, how she was doing in school, and if the Carsons had noticed any changes in her behavior. Julian answered each question smoothly, emphasizing their dedication to structure and discipline, within reason, he claimed. Miranda chimed in with small anecdotes about providing extra tutoring, ensuring Lila maintained a strong academic standing, and teaching her good manners. Nothing they said was directly damning, yet Ms. Daniels found it unsettling how each response felt rehearsed, as though they had answers ready for every concern. At one point, she politely asked if they had noticed any bruises or injuries on Lila, explaining that children can be prone to accident. Miranda's lips tightened ever so slightly before she responded, "She's clumsy sometimes. A fall here or there. Kids will be kids, right?" Julian placed an almost protective hand on Miranda's shoulder as he added, "We're just as concerned as you are if she's getting hurt somehow. But we haven't seen anything serious." Ms. Daniels exchanged a glance with Christine. From the surface, the house looked perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. There were no signs of chaos, no immediate red flags like disorganized rooms or suspicious injuries on the adults themselves. Everything was meticulously arranged, from the spotless countertops to the carefully displayed family photos. The portrait of Julian and Miranda smiling with Lila in the middle seemed staged, Lila's forced smile incongruous with her usual timid eyes. After a half-hour of conversation, Ms. Daniels and Christine concluded the visit, promising to keep in touch. Miranda graciously walked them to the door. Just as Ms. Daniels was about to step outside, she turned back with a disarming smile. "We appreciate your cooperation," she said, "but if you don't mind, we'd like to see Lila soon and speak with her privately." Miranda blinked once, her smile never faltering. "Of course," she replied. "We look forward to arranging something soon." Julian simply nodded, standing stoically behind his wife. Ms. Daniels thought she caught a flicker of tension in the corner of his mouth. Then again, it could have been her imagination, though her instincts rarely misled her. Once outside, Christine sighed. "I don't know," she said under her breath. "They seem normal, but it's almost too clean, too perfect." Ms. Daniels nodded. "My thoughts exactly. We'll follow up with Lila and see if she's comfortable talking. I suspect there's more than meets the eye here." The home visit confirmed Ms. Daniels's worst suspicion. There was something oppressive lurking behind the Carsons' pristine facade. Over the next few days, Lila returned to school, but with every passing moment, the bruises seemed to multiply. Small ones at first, like shadows on her wrists, then deeper blotches on her arms or near her ribs, barely hidden by long-sleeved shirts. The staff at Willow Ridge Academy, especially Mr. Clark, Ms. Norris, and Morton, grew increasingly alarmed. Ms. Norris, one of the gentler educators, seemed particularly distressed. She was known for her kind-hearted nature, always the first to volunteer for extracurricular activities aimed at helping struggling students. She would check on Lila after class, ask how she was feeling, and offer small moments of comfort. "You can always talk to me," Ms. Norris would say, her warm smile inviting trust. Sometimes she placed a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder, telling her she wasn't alone. Lila, in turn, seemed to take solace in Ms. Norris's kindness, even as her eyes spoke of anxieties she couldn't voice. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark became increasingly protective of Lila. Whether it was offering extra tutoring or simply a safe space in his classroom during lunch, he tried to fill any gap he thought might leave her vulnerable to whomever was hurting her. The man had his own scars to bear, reminders of a past in which he, too, had felt powerless against forces bigger than himself. Over the years, he had developed a personal vendetta against adults who exploited children, using his role as a teacher to stand guard over them. Now, in Lila, he saw a reflection of the silent fear he once carried. One afternoon, Ms. Daniels pulled Mr. Clark aside in the corridor. The overhead lights flickered for a second, casting moving shadows along the painted cinder-block walls. "I need more concrete details," she murmured. "We suspect abuse, but Lila keeps clamming up. She won't say anything incriminating. The Carsons insist they're wonderful caregivers." Mr. Clark frowned, recalling the day Lila begged Morton to let her stay in the school. "Her fear is palpable," he said. "She flinches at sudden sounds, and she's always watching her back. But I think she's terrified of the consequences if she speaks up. We need proof of what they're doing to her." Ms. Daniels nodded. "We have to help her. I'll keep pushing discreetly, but she's likely been threatened. She might think that talking will make things worse." "I'll keep my eyes open," Mr. Clark promised. That same evening, Ms. Daniels visited Lila in the emergency shelter where she was temporarily placed after the first overnight ordeal. The room was sparse but clean, 2 single beds, a small window looking out onto a busy street, and a worn dresser. Lila was perched on the edge of one bed, hugging her knees. Her eyes flicked up the moment Ms. Daniels entered. "I just want to talk," Ms. Daniels said gently, sliding a chair over to face Lila. "I know it's scary, but we can't protect you unless we know what's really going on." Lila stared at the floor, silent for a moment. At last, she looked up and whispered, "They don't like it when I speak to people outside." "Who doesn't like it?" Ms. Daniels pressed, though softly. Lila hesitated. Then, quietly, "Julian and Miranda. They say it's disrespectful to pry into family matters." Ms. Daniels fought to keep her face neutral. "Are they the ones hurting you?" There it was again, the fleeting flicker of fear in Lila's eyes. She swallowed, but she never quite answered. Ms. Daniels understood enough. The unspoken confirmation was right there. Lila's next words were heartbreakingly earnest. "They're good at pretending. They're good at hiding things." Ms. Daniels placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "Not forever," she said. "We're going to make sure that truth comes out." That promise would prove harder to keep than Ms. Daniels anticipated. When she attempted to arrange a formal hearing for Lila's case, the Carsons mounted a defense. Julian, in particular, knew precisely which strings to pull. He enlisted the help of an attorney who specialized in representing foster families against allegations they claimed were fabricated or exaggerated. Soon, Ms. Daniels found herself entangled in bureaucratic obstacles, each more time-consuming than the last. Hearings were postponed, documents requested, verifications required, everything slowed to a snail's pace, frustrating attempts to shield Lila from further harm. During this time, Ms. Daniels also noticed a subtle chill in Ms. Norris's demeanor. While Ms. Norris still appeared supportive, there were odd moments when she sidestepped certain questions about the Carsons or quickly changed the subject. Once, when Ms. Daniels confided that the Carsons' spotless reputation might be a cover for something sinister, Ms. Norris merely pursed her lips and said, "I don't know if I can believe that just yet. We must be absolutely sure." The word struck Ms. Daniels as unusual, coming from a teacher who had once been unwaveringly empathetic toward Lila's situation. Something about Ms. Norris's hesitancy didn't feel right, but Ms. Daniels couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. She decided to keep her suspicions to herself for the time being, though they gnawed at her all the same. As the weeks dragged on, the signs of harm done to Lila grew harder to hide. She came to school one day with a limp, and though she insisted she had tripped on a step, Mr. Clark found the story unconvincing. Another time, Mr. Morton discovered her crying in a supply closet, arms wrapped around herself, fresh bruises along her wrists. The heartbreak in her eyes was beyond words. It was in that moment that Morton realized just how badly the system was failing her. All the protocols, all the phone calls and paperwork, none of it was halting the abuse. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice trembling with quiet outrage. "We're not giving up on you, Lila," he said, wishing there was more he could do beyond cleaning the floors and repairing the lockers. He was just a janitor, or so he'd always seen himself. But now he wondered if that self-perception was an excuse to stay on the sidelines. Soon after, Child Protective Services had enough cause to take Lila out of the Carson home, at least temporarily, pending further investigation. She was moved to a different shelter, one that specialized in emergency care for abused children. On paper, this was meant to offer her protection, but the environment was overwhelming for Lila. She spent most of her days in anxiety, worrying that she would be placed in another home just as bad or worse. Over the next week, Lila's emotional state deteriorated. She had nightmares, barely ate, and spoke even less than usual. Despair began to shape her every movement, a sense of hopelessness settling over her like a dark cloud. In a moment of utter desperation, she ran away from the shelter. The staff, busy attending to dozens of other children, didn't notice she was gone until hours later. Night had already fallen by the time Lila slipped out of the shelter. She wandered the streets, hoping to go unnoticed. Her thoughts were a jumbled chaos: fear, loneliness, distrust. She didn't know where to go. Running felt like the only option left to her. As she passed dimly lit storefronts and parked cars, she clutched a small backpack with a single spare shirt and the tiny stuffed bunny she had carried from home to home, the only item that consistently gave her comfort. Her escape did not remain secret for long. When the shelter staff realized she was missing, they contacted the authorities and Ms. Daniels. That was how Mr. Clark found himself driving through the wet, drizzly streets late into the night, scanning sidewalks and bus stops, hoping to spot Lila. The city was not large, but in darkness, every street corner looked suspicious, every shadow a potential hiding place. When at last he caught sight of a small figure huddled against a lamppost in a deserted corner of the city, Mr. Clark felt relief flood his entire body. He pulled over and rushed to the sidewalk. "Lila," he called softly. "It's me, Mr. Clark. Please, come with me. It's not safe out here." Upon hearing his voice, Lila lifted her head. At first, she seemed poised to flee, but then recognition dawned. Her breath came in panicked bursts as she stared up at him. I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, tears glistening on her cheeks. Mr. Clark knelt beside her, carefully offering his hand. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to decide alone. Let's get you somewhere safe." She let him guide her into his car. He wrapped his jacket around her shivering form, turned on the heater, and drove away from the desolation of that street corner. He glanced at her every so often, worried she might disappear if he looked away for too long. Her eyes drooped, exhaustion claiming her. He brought her back to his modest apartment, an impulsive decision, perhaps, but driven by genuine concern for her immediate well-being. Legally, it was a messy choice. A teacher shouldn't bring a runaway student to his home without following the official channels. However, in that moment, he couldn't bear the thought of returning her to the shelter, where she clearly felt unsafe. He would call Ms. Daniels first thing in the morning and explain everything, consequences be damned. Inside his apartment, he offered her the couch, fetched her a blanket, and told her she could rest. Lila murmured something that might have been, "Thank you," before her eyes slid closed. Mr. Clark watched her for a moment, struck by the fragility of this child who had faced such hardships. He found himself quietly vowing that he would not let the system fail her again. The next morning, Ms. Daniels arrived, having spent half the night coordinating with the authorities in her search for Lila. When she saw the girl was safe at Mr. Clark's place, relief washed over her, though it was tempered by professional concerns. "I'm glad you're all right," she said to Lila. Then, turning to Mr. Clark, she added, "We need to handle this carefully. She can't stay here indefinitely, not without going through the proper process." Mr. Clark nodded, acknowledging the correctness of her statement. Nonetheless, the look in his eyes conveyed just how strongly he wanted to protect Lila from further harm. Ms. Daniels made a series of phone calls, sorting out the immediate legalities. By evening, they had arranged for Lila to stay temporarily with a trusted caretaker affiliated with the school district, someone well-equipped to support traumatized children. It was, at least, a safer environment than the previous shelter. As the days turned into weeks, legal proceedings against the Carsons gathered momentum. Detective Reed, known for his meticulous investigations into child welfare cases, joined forces with Mr. Vaughn, a journalist determined to expose any wrongdoing that had been hidden behind respectable facade. They worked together, gathering statements, records, medical reports, photographs of bruises, and testimonials from other foster children who had previously stayed with the Carsons. The evidence they collected painted a harrowing picture of control and maltreatment. The swirl of this growing case meant that Lila's darkest experiences were about to be laid bare for everyone: court officials, lawyers, perhaps even the public. She spent hours with Ms. Daniels, practicing how to speak on the stand, how to answer questions without feeling overwhelmed. Each session left her trembling. She couldn't forget Julian's warning from long ago, a chilling threat that if she ever told anyone about what happened in their house, she would be cast aside, labeled a liar, or worse. While Lila prepared for what felt like the most frightening day of her life, Mr. Clark found his faith in Ms. Norris shaken. He had caught glimpses of phone calls or overheard half-conversations that raised his suspicion about her loyalties. Once, he even heard her mention the Carsons in a hushed tone, though she abruptly hung up when she saw him approach. The seeds of doubt he had tried to ignore about her began to sprout. Nevertheless, Ms. Norris continued her outward show of concern for Lila, giving her small gifts of stationery or books. It was puzzling. Sometimes Ms. Norris's eyes shone with genuine empathy, and other times, Mr. Clark perceived an odd detachment lurking behind her polite exterior. He couldn't pinpoint whether she was truly an ally or if there was something more sinister in her actions. Court day arrived with relentless tension. Lila, flanked by Ms. Daniels and Mr. Clark, walked into the courthouse, her shoulders rigid, her breath shallow. The Carsons were already there, dressed in neatly pressed attire, their expressions grave yet somehow composed. Their attorney had come prepared to paint Lila as a troubled child prone to fabrications and exaggerations. He would highlight every minor disciplinary note in Lila's school records, every instance of miscommunication, aiming to cast doubt on her credibility. Ms. Daniels gave Lila's hand a gentle squeeze. "Remember, just tell the truth," she whispered. "We've got evidence. You're not alone." But Lila's voice wavered when she took the stand. The unfamiliar environment, the stern judge, the rows of onlookers, it overwhelmed her. She glanced over at the Carsons and saw Julian's piercing stare. Fear flooded her system, tangling her thoughts and making it hard to speak. She stammered, her sentences broken, her recollections jumbled. The Carsons' attorney jumped on every discrepancy, every pause, twisting her words to sow doubt. It was agonizing for Mr. Clark, sitting on the sidelines, to witness Lila's terror. He silently urged her to remain strong. Yet, the child who had endured so much was on the brink of collapse under the oppressive weight of cross-examination. At one point, she even broke down in tears, unable to continue. The judge called for a brief recess. During that recess, Ms. Daniels led Lila to a quieter area of the courthouse, offering her water and tissues. Detective Reed appeared, a folder in hand. He looked determined. "We've got more than enough material," he said. "Photographic evidence, medical reports, statements from neighbors who overheard shouting. Lila doesn't have to shoulder this alone." Ms. Daniels nodded, relief loosening the knot in her chest. "We must ensure it's all admissible, but yes, it should help. If she can't testify fully, we'll lean on the evidence." Meanwhile, Mr. Vaughn, the journalist, was busily finalizing an exposé that would soon run, featuring details about the Carsons' history, connections, and disturbing pattern of taking in foster children who all seemed to come out worse for wear. The Carsons, however, remained unwavering in their defense, casting Lila as a girl who'd had emotional troubles long before arriving at their home. When the court resumed, Ms. Norris was called to the stand. Everyone had expected her to bolster Lila's case, given her known kindness toward the child. But to the shock of Mr. Clark and Ms. Daniels, Ms. Norris's testimony was alarmingly neutral, bordering on supportive of the Carsons. She spoke softly, avoiding direct accusations. Her words carefully sidestepped condemnation, suggesting that while Lila exhibited signs of unhappiness, Ms. Norris could not personally confirm any abuse. It was a severe blow. Mr. Clark's mouth fell open as he listened, outraged by what he perceived as betrayal. He exchanged a furious look with Ms. Daniels. Ms. Norris, for her part, avoided meeting their eyes. Was it guilt or something else entirely? In that moment, the carefully built case against the Carsons took a hit, with Ms. Norris's ambiguous statements introducing an unwelcome element of doubt. The cross-examinations continued. Detective Reed presented the recordings he had obtained, low-quality phone messages and hidden audio from a wire Lila had worn at Ms. Daniels's suggestion. The sound of Miranda's sharp voice, issuing chilling commands and threats, made several people in the courtroom flinch. Gasps rippled through the audience. Then came additional documentation, showing past foster children placed under the Carsons' care had also exhibited unexplained bruises and emotional distress, though those cases were never fully pursued. Slowly, momentum shifted back to Lila's side, though the road was far from smooth. The Carsons' lawyer fought tooth and nail to discredit the recordings, questioning their authenticity. The judge, however, allowed them. Bit by bit, the Carsons' polished veneer began to crack. Then came Lila's second chance to testify. She took the stand once more, after a brief pep talk from Ms. Daniels and Mr. Clark in the hallway. This time, though visibly shaking, she managed to speak in a firm, albeit quavering, voice. She described how Julian had berated her for minor missteps, how Miranda had withheld meals and threatened worse punishments. The tension was palpable. Her final words seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. "They hurt me," she said, her voice trembling. "They said no one would believe me. They said I was a liar. But I'm not lying." The hush in the room intensified. The Carsons shifted uneasily, their composure fading. Detective Reed's collected evidence now merged seamlessly with Lila's testimony, painting an undeniably disturbing picture. Even the judge, who had maintained a neutral tone throughout, looked disturbed. At that point, the case against the Carsons seemed airtight. The jury, if not already swayed by the mounting evidence, was certainly sobered by the raw vulnerability in Lila's voice. And so, with methodical thoroughness, the prosecution laid out the final pieces of the puzzle. The Carsons were declared guilty of child endangerment, among other charges. Julian looked furious, Miranda stunned. Their attorneys stood rigid, apparently anticipating an uphill battle in any appeal. When the verdict was announced, Mr. Clark allowed himself a moment of relief, exhaling slowly as he glanced at Lila. She looked exhausted, tears shining in her eyes, but there was a flicker of hope on her face. Hope that maybe, at long last, she wouldn't be forced to return to that house of nightmares. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Daniels placed an arm around Lila's shoulders. "It's over," she murmured. "You're free of them." But Lila's gaze held a lingering unease. Perhaps she sensed what none of them wanted to consider, that the Carsons wouldn't relinquish their grip so easily. In the weeks following the trial, a sense of cautious optimism settled over Willow Ridge Academy. Lila, though traumatized, gradually began to show signs of healing. She stayed under the watchful care of a supportive foster guardian, arranged by Ms. Daniels. Various teachers at the school tried to help her catch up on work she had missed. Small rays of normalcy pierced the darkness of her past. Detective Reed and Mr. Vaughn persisted in unraveling the Carsons' network. Their investigation suggested Julian and Miranda were part of a circle of individuals who exploited vulnerable children for personal gain, though no immediate evidence tied them to anything beyond Lila's case. The Carsons themselves, having been found guilty, were remanded to custody until sentencing. It seemed the matter was nearly concluded, at least legally. Yet, this sense of closure shattered in a single terrifying night. Mr. Clark was awakened in the small hours by the sound of his back window shattering. Half dazed, he rushed into the hallway, heart pounding. Through the darkness, he glimpsed shadows moving. He heard Lila's scream. Panic flared in his mind, accompanied by a horrifying realization. The Carsons must have arranged some way to break free or send someone on their behalf. He sprinted to Lila's room. He had taken her in temporarily again with Ms. Daniels's blessing, believing it was the best environment for her. But he was too late. The room was in disarray. A curtain torn from its rod. A toppled lamp. And Lila was gone. Adrenaline roared through him. He dashed outside, but only saw the dark, empty street. In the faint glow of a distant street lamp, a car was speeding away, its red taillights disappearing into the night. A dreadful silence followed, broken only by Mr. Clark's ragged breathing. Without delay, he alerted Ms. Daniels, who then called the authorities. Detective Reed arrived quickly, a grim set to his features. They combed every inch of Mr. Clark's home, searching for clues. A neighbor reported seeing a man and woman forcing a girl into a vehicle, but the description was too vague. All signs pointed to the Carsons orchestrating a kidnapping, possibly out of revenge or a twisted desire to reclaim control of Lila's fate. The next few hours bled into days of relentless anxiety. The search for Lila was urgent, with local law enforcement mobilizing to find her. Ms. Daniels and Mr. Clark were racked with guilt, each blaming themselves for not anticipating that the Carsons might attempt something so brazen. Meanwhile, rumors circulated in hushed whispers among the staff at Willow Ridge Academy. The unspeakable had happened. A child at their school, snatched by her abusers after they'd been convicted. Those 4 days were nothing short of agonizing for everyone who cared about Lila. Detective Reed leveraged every resource he had, while Mr. Vaughn churned out reports demanding public awareness and vigilance, hoping someone might spot the Carsons. Ms. Daniels barely slept, haunted by nightmares of Lila trapped, alone and terrified. Mr. Clark vacillated between fits of despair and bursts of determination. He pressed Detective Reed for updates each hour, but no promising leads emerged. As for Lila herself, she endured captivity that tested the limits of her resolve. Julian and Miranda had taken her to a remote location, a small, run-down house on the outskirts of a neighboring county. The windows were boarded up, and the interior smelled of mold and damp. With chilling composure, Julian reminded Lila of the consequences of disobedience, while Miranda hovered in the background with an unsettling half-smile that froze Lila's blood. They weren't sure how long they could stay there, but evidently, the Carsons had prepared enough to make it last for a while. Lila was told in no uncertain terms that she would never see her precious Mr. Clark again unless she did exactly as Julian demanded. But this time, Lila, though terrified, was not the same timid child they had terrorized before. She had tasted the possibility of freedom, had begun to believe that her voice mattered. In the dark corners of that house, she mustered the courage to leave subtle clues. Perhaps it was a hastily scrawled note pressed into a gap in the floorboards, or a whispered message through a crack in the wall when she briefly saw a neighbor. Each attempt at signaling was fraught with risk. If the Carsons caught her, the consequences would be dire. But she persisted. She remembered Ms. Daniels's promise that telling the truth could save her. And she remembered Mr. Clark's vow that he would always come for her, no matter what. Word eventually reached Detective Reed of unusual activity near that decrepit property. A neighbor who recognized Lila's description from Mr. Vaughn's coverage noticed a small face peering through a boarded window, along with a muffled sound of crying. The neighbor was frightened to get involved but found the courage to place an anonymous tip. That was all Detective Reed needed. He alerted the necessary authorities, who in turn mobilized a specialized team. The FBI had been tangentially involved in the Carsons' network investigation, so it was natural they assisted in the operation to rescue Lila. On the 5th day of her abduction, they surrounded the rundown house at dawn. Julian and Miranda, cornered and desperate, refused to come out. Tensions soared as the authorities prepared to breach the premises. Lila huddled in a corner, heart racing, listening to Miranda's frantic whispers and Julian's angry curses. At one point, he threatened to harm Lila if the authorities didn't back off. His voice trembled with the raw edge of desperation, but Lila heard the fear behind it. They were losing. In a final, desperate outburst, Julian grabbed Lila, trying to keep her bound as he shouted through the door. But the authorities had forced their way inside in a swift maneuver. A determined agent managed to rush Julian at the perfect moment, subduing him with a precise and forceful takedown. Miranda, shrieking, was apprehended a heartbeat later. Lila, trembling, felt herself being lifted to safety by a kind voice telling her, "You're going to be all right." The traumatic ordeal ended as law enforcement led Lila into the early morning light. She squinted at the brightness and felt a wave of relief so overwhelming that she nearly collapsed. Detective Reed appeared at her side, gently guiding her into the care of paramedics. "You're safe now," he told her. She nodded, tears in her eyes, unable to speak. Within hours, Ms. Daniels and Mr. Clark arrived, their faces ashen with worry that dissolved into relief upon seeing Lila alive, albeit shaken and exhausted. Ms. Daniels carefully drew Lila into a gentle embrace, whispering how sorry she was that any of this had happened. Lila clung to her, the child's body racked with silent sobs as a dozen emotions surged through her at once. Mr. Clark, nearby, wiped away tears of his own, overwhelmed by gratitude that they had found her before it was too late. The Carsons, once again in custody, faced additional charges. This time, there would be no leniency. They had violated every condition of their previous verdict. Their web of influence was shattered. Julian's cool facade was gone, replaced by bitter resentment. Miranda's composure broke entirely. She cried and raged, blaming everyone else for her downfall. Whatever perverse power they once held dissolved under the harsh scrutiny of the law. In the aftermath, Lila's trauma ran deep. She had endured too much fear, too many betrayals. Sleep did not come easily. Images of boarded windows and dark rooms haunted her nights. During the day, she occasionally found herself flinching at unexpected movements or lapsing into silence when confronted by strangers. Yet, the difference now was that she had a real support system in place. Mr. Clark, Ms. Daniels, Detective Reed, and a community of caring individuals who refused to let her slip through the cracks again. Therapy sessions became a central part of Lila's life. She spent hours each week with a skilled counselor who specialized in helping children overcome abuse and traumatic stress. At first, it was difficult for her to open up. She would stare at the floor, giving minimal responses. But gradually, through patience and gentle encouragement, she began to speak about her nightmares, her fears, and her longing for a permanent family that would truly love her. Mr. Clark's presence remained a steady source of comfort. Whenever he could, he brought Lila small gifts, a new journal for her thoughts, or a drawing pad where she could express her feelings in sketches. Over time, she scribbled out images of dark houses and lonely streets, but she also drew glimpses of a future filled with light. The lines were shaky, the color sometimes chaotic, but each page told a story of survival and the slow process of healing. As the chaos settled, and after thorough consideration by Child Protective Services and the courts, Mr. Clark took a step that would forever change both his life and Lila's. He filed the paperwork necessary to foster Lila himself, beginning the journey toward adoption. He knew it would be complicated. He was, after all, a single man, not wealthy by any means, and he had to prove he could provide the stable home environment Lila desperately needed. But he pushed forward, unwavering. Ms. Daniels supported his application, noting how integral Mr. Clark had been in Lila's rescue and subsequent care. "He's shown more commitment to her than many parents show in a lifetime," Ms. Daniels told the family court judge. And the judge, upon reviewing the evidence of the relationship Mr. Clark had formed with Lila, agreed that she could not be placed with anyone more dedicated. Lila herself felt a deep sense of gratitude, mixed with worry that maybe it was too good to be true, that someone would eventually come and take her away again. But day by day, the fear receded. She witnessed how Mr. Clark prepared a special room for her in his apartment, complete with small personal touches. Pastel-colored bed linens, shelves for books and stuffed animals. She noticed how he genuinely listened whenever she spoke, how he never grew angry or impatient at her lingering nightmares. In the final stretch of this chapter of her life, Lila stood in a small family courtroom, flanked by Mr. Clark and Ms. Daniels. The judge, with a reassuring smile, granted the adoption. A wave of emotion rippled through the room. Lila pressed her lips together, trying and failing to stop tears from spilling out. Mr. Clark, his eyes also watering, gently placed an arm around her. "We're a family now," he whispered, voice hoarse with emotion. The sense of relief and accomplishment was immense. Julian and Miranda Carson remained behind bars, facing an extended sentence. Their ability to harm Lila, or anyone else, was eliminated. Ms. Norris's betrayal was exposed during follow-up investigations. It turned out she had tenuous ties to the Carsons, connected through a family friend who had once helped Ms. Norris out of a financial crisis. Whether coerced or complicit, Ms. Norris lost her teaching job for providing misleading testimonies in court. Willow Ridge Academy, in the aftermath, undertook significant reforms, tightening protocols for reporting suspected abuse and scrutinizing staff backgrounds more thoroughly. In the days that followed, Lila found herself exploring a life free from daily dread. She hesitated whenever she heard a sudden knock at the door, still shaken by echoes of the past, but with therapy and Mr. Clark's unwavering support, her anxious grip on reality began to loosen. She laughed more often, even if quietly. She ventured out to the local park without feeling as though someone lurked behind every tree. Exactly 1 month after she was rescued from that dilapidated house, Lila joined Mr. Clark, Ms. Daniels, and Detective Reed for a small dinner in the cozy confines of Mr. Clark's apartment. The table was set with simple dishes: pasta, salad, a pitcher of water. Nothing fancy, just a warm, communal meal. They chatted about everyday things. School assignments, a funny anecdote Detective Reed shared from one of his recent cases, Ms. Daniels's new training workshops for child advocacy. Lila remained mostly quiet, but there was a faint smile on her face, a genuine ease in her posture that none of them had ever seen before. "Are you happy?" Mr. Clark asked her gently, conscious that the question was loaded with meaning. Lila looked up, meeting his gaze. She nodded, her voice soft but steady. "I'm really happy," she said. And in that moment, her eyes glimmered with a resolute hope, the shadows of her past no longer all-consuming. The meal continued in a sweet, tranquil hush. Occasionally, Ms. Daniels reached over to give Lila a reassuring pat on the hand, and each time, Lila accepted it with a grateful smile. Detective Reed raised his glass in a small toast, dedicating it to second chances and new beginnings. Lila raised her own glass, albeit hesitantly. It felt strange, celebrating a future she had once thought impossible. Yet, here she was, surrounded by people who genuinely cared, and the sense of belonging warmed her heart like never before. That night, when Lila went to bed in her new room, she gazed at the glow-in-the-dark stars Mr. Clark had affixed to the ceiling. Tiny constellations shimmered above her, a silent promise that she was no longer trapped in darkness. The nightmares would not vanish overnight, nor would the memories fade completely. But for once in her young life, she felt safe. And that safety opened the door to a precious gift, a belief that tomorrow could be better, and that she had a place in this world where she was truly wanted. The nightmare was over, or at least the worst of it was. Julian and Miranda Carson had failed in their final act of cruelty, leaving Lila at last free to embrace a new life. The future stretched before her, uncertain but no longer overshadowed by hidden bruises and terrified secrets. Surrounded by genuine allies, Mr. Clark, Ms. Daniels, Detective Reed, and others who stood up for justice, Lila ventured forward, step by step, into the hopeful horizon of what might come next. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.